So for everyone who will be joining, I want to introduce Cecilia. Cecilia is a writer and also a mother living in California. She is raising her son, parenting solo, and she has collaborated in the past with many publications. So I would love for you to kind of like tell us a little bit more about that.
Yeah, as a writer, I think, or an advocate, let's see, when did it start? Yeah, so I'm one of the founding members of the group, the Chicana Motherwork Collective. We started working together in 2016, so we've done many different projects, including an anthology that came out in 2019. Around the same time in 2016, I met Trina Green Brown, who is the founder of Parenting for Liberation. And she started Parenting for Liberation around the same time that me and my collective started Chicana Motherwork. So when we kind of found each other online, and from there, I did a couple of projects with Trina. We were on each other's podcasts early on. Did we developed and taught a series for mothers of color who were incarcerated in California. So we taught in the prison about how to raise liberated children. Um, and then I've always been a writer, but really it was just more recently that I'm working on different pieces. I'm working on a creative nonfiction manuscript right now. But the one piece that I still get questions about, emails about, is a piece that I wrote in 2017. Yeah, 2017, called Mothering While Brown, or When I Took My Son to Octavia Butler's exhibit. So that piece was about when I took my son to the Huntington Library. So for people who aren't familiar with that, it's very it's a very prestigious kind of bougie place. And when I took my son there to see the Octavia Butler exhibit, and she's one of my favorite writers, the security
Mine
guard
as
asked
well.
us to, what was that?
I love her too. I
Oh
love
yeah,
her
yeah,
writing
yeah.
too. Hmm.
Yeah, yeah. And yeah, that's all I wanted to do. I just wanted to see, it was her diaries, the drafts, photographs, because her archives are there at the Huntington. So my piece, what I wrote about was my experience with the security guard, kind of following me and my son around, and kind of two times he told us, oh, my son couldn't, be playing, my son couldn't be there. And then the third time he approached us is when he said, "Oh, you can sit over there," and he was kind of pointing out of the exhibit, and he pointed to this bench. So pretty much, we were asked to leave. So I wrote about that experience, and it got all these views on the blog. It was on the Chicana Mother blog. The president at the time of the Huntington emailed me directly and wanted to meet. People invited me to go do readings, but I think with my writing, and the writing I'm working on right now, is I do focus on mothering and activism, because I think that that is still something that's really not represented in traditional publishing. So there are blogs, there's self-publishing, there's many different ways to publish. Um, and in traditional publishing, it's still very hard to get these kinds of voices and perspectives in these publishing houses. So that's what I'm working on right now. I got 4 different creative writing fellowships this year so far. So I'm really getting a lot of help in terms of what the publishing industry looks like. I mean, I already got a sense of it being the editor of the Chicana Motherwork anthology, but it is different coming to publish traditional publishing as a creative writer. But my writing, it is focused on being a single mother of color, and that intersection with social justice, because that's a part of that identity is a part of everything else that I do.
Yes, yes. And I was going to mention that you also identify yourself as an Afro-Chicana, which, usually is kind of like we have to talk about it. What's happening with the heights and like the continual erasure of Black Latines in arts and in all the areas, which is seriously an issue because it's being called out so many times, and it keeps happening and happening and happening. So I mean, I think it's so important to have this conversation, especially like I think between the community of Latinas, because like I feel like so many of us may identify like Latinas, but we have so many representations inside that label, which for me is kind of like I always say that being an immigrant and arriving here and kind of like being titled, Latina, like I'm like, okay, first time ever. Like that is definitely a label that is not a label in many other places of the world. It's a very American label for it. And I think it's in many ways it's also very problematic because the main representation of Latinas in media and as communities usually are not what what we are, because we have Latinas from all the ranges, and the Black Latinas are continually being erased. So I don't know if you want to share something about that. I have my saying about that because I think my children, my partner is mixed, and usually that part of his heritage is being continually suppressed somehow, but all his family like has a story, and all the family, and still we are called Latinx, like we don't have many ethnicities, we don't have it, so and I think that's kind of like a huge issue, especially raising children in our communities.
So I think it can be very complex because Latinx people, that identity, it's not a race, it's people's ethnicities, and I think that still gets conflated so often in the media. But even in my context, with academics, with Latinx academics who study race and ethnicity. So it's really frustrating for me because we all agree on these theoretical understandings, particularly with academics, and yet there is still this refusal to acknowledge racial differences with Latinx people. I think in my particular case, that has my identity has been something that, and I'm writing about this in my creative writing right now, my creative nonfiction essays, but it's been a little different or more complicated for me because what my father having being Afro-Mexican, having Afro-Mexican ancestry through my father's side, my father, even today, still denies his African ancestry, even though on my father's side of the family, there's people with, kinky hair, just racial features, skin tone, and I think because of that, I didn't see myself as Afro-Chicana until more recently. So I think in my case, I want to be more careful in the sense that when we have this discussion, I also am very cognizant of in some ways privileges, because I think this conversation should be centered with dark-skinned Black Latinx people. And so for me, my skin is dark, but it's not as dark. I don't have kinky hair. So I think in those ways, I am cognizant that in some ways, my proximity to Blackness can feel, safer to some people. So I'm very aware of that. And I don't think that even my writing or my voice even should be centered in that. But I do have my own experiences and my own story to tell.
What about
And it
the
is more.
child? Like, is your child, um, like mixed as well, or because I think, like in many instances, I'm realizing like I'm having now teenagers, and I remember, like asking both of my children, like, how do you see yourself? And, like I have teach them Spanish. We only speak Spanish at home. And I remember, like both of them were very surprised when, like I asked them a question, because they see themselves in their own way, like they have their own opinions about their own identity. And even though, we are very, like I feel like I have tried all my best to instill identity on them, it gets diluted very easily, especially living in a country where everything is about labels and stereotypes. So they were telling me, like, I don't identify like that because we are not from. And I was like, you don't have to be from. You have that heritage. Both of your parents are immigrants. Like, there's so many issues, and I see it all the time, especially with adults, like still trying to find and search for their own identities, because uh, sadly, as families, we don't have these conversations.
Yeah. So I think it can be hard. So for my son, I have talked a lot about uh, people of color, racial justice, social justice. So even from when he was very young, things like books that celebrate Black people and brown people, people of color. And so he's 11 now, and he'll say things like, white supremacy. So so he does have more of an understanding, and I think it can be difficult because even in his school, for example, you know, these uh, these complexities are not taught still, in many schools. So then when he's with me or when he comes home, then it's my job to teach him these other perspectives and these other histories. But when I became a mother, it was very important for me to particularly talk about Blackness in Latin America, because that's something that I never got. And I only heard, for example, from my dad, internalized anti-Blackness, or other forms of anti-Blackness just in our society, in our cultures, even Mexican culture, right? So,
It's very embedded in all of our
mhm,
cultures, I have to say
yeah.
it. And we have, one of the things that I think, like I would love to share with our audience is that the first step to kind of really get to an understanding of the situation is really acknowledge it, that it's a huge issue in our country. The anti-Blackness is like, it's so embedded at so many levels, and still, like we have people denying it and saying things, that, oh no, like that doesn't exist, like it's about classism. I'm like, well, it's about classism, but also anti-Blackness. There's so many levels to the thing that, and sadly, that is translated to people, coming to the United States and keep holding those systems that have been so damaging to our communities in general.
Yeah, yeah, and I think that's part of the healing work that I've had to do on my own, healing as a mother, but also healing from intergenerational internalized racism and anti-Blackness, and the work can feel so heavy. And I think back to my own childhood because I only heard from my dad. I didn't have examples of what Black Latina people looked like on TV because they weren't on TV, or people in the media. Things are a lot different now for our kids. So I'm glad that there are more, things are changing, but, not enough because, as we saw with In the Heights, what the controversy happening now. But there are more changes being made. But at the time, when I think back to my childhood, or even my young adulthood, I think that I also internalize it to the sense that I thought that there wasn't a difference with me and white Latina people. So I couldn't even recognize really myself in the mirror. And when I think back to that, I think that's such a deep kind of wounding. And I think that goes back to my dad, because my dad would very proudly say that, he never wears shorts, like ever. All his life, because he doesn't want to get tan or more tan than he is. Um,
And I
and
see that a lot, especially with Caribbean community. Like I remember when I moved here, I live in West Palm Beach, and I encountered people from the Caribbean, and they were telling me like, oh, we don't go to the beach. And I was like, how come? Like we live, nearby the beach, and like they would never tell me, like exactly why. But later on, I realized that like it was because they didn't want it to either get sunburn, to get darker, because that was like a huge issue for them. So they will argue, like they have a condition in their skin and stuff like that. But later on, like I realized that that happens to me with somebody that I met very closely. And also the same with the hair. Uh, this person always treated her hair that, in a way that it was really a huge issue. And it, I didn't grow up, like understanding those things. I have to do that, like you said, you have to grow and you have to kind of like, educate yourself as well. And I remember, like, that was an issue for her. Like she was telling me one time, like, I know I don't like to go to the beach because that will create so many other issues. And in my family, we don't look like that. And that was, wow, like it was a huge realization for me. Um, and that says a lot about my privilege, like, not even paying attention to those things. So as a mother, I had the opportunity to talk to both of my children about those things. Like, like how our the friends, like that have to take longer to create more routines around their hair care, and also, like if they have issues with the way they look, because sadly we are dealing with a lot of the community, especially in Latina community, where they don't like to see themselves darker.
yeah, so that's still it's still ongoing. It's still an uncomfortable topic for people. I think especially what's happening now, and it reminds me of the In the Heights controversy, where people are very uncomfortable talking about colorism, or even Latina people who are well-meaning, or who are aware of racism and social justice and who want to make changes. I think it's still very uncomfortable because what I have experienced is that I think part of it is so you are having these conversations with your children. I think where I see some resistance is with white Latina people identifying as white. There still is that resistance that they don't want to do that, but I think that's also what makes it harder to, you know, dismantle the anti-Blackness if we can't have this agreement to something that has been historically true, and you know it remains true today. You know, and I've seen
And it's
on,
so funny
yeah.
that you're mentioning that because actually something like that happened when like I mentioned I am an immigrant, so I came here, you know, old enough to know, you know, like a lot of things. I was not a child. And so the title of Latine, you know, like that was imposed on me somehow. But what you're saying is so true. Like in Colombia, like from where I'm coming from, um, the majority of people will say that they're white. They will never say like I'm indigenous or black. Like and it doesn't matter, you know, on many levels how they, you know, like pass. So it's only when they arrive here that somehow we all adopt this label because, you know, it's like the norm. And also because it can be convenient uh, for many reasons, no? But it can also be an erasure of so many other identities. And that's why we're having this conversation today. I wanted to have this conversation especially because we are in a time where I've seen a lot of Latine who are indeed white. Their alliances are really turning, and that bothers me immensely because at this point, I think, you know, like we all know how the system works. And I always say, you know, like the totem pole works. Like who's up and down. And not because we wanted to, not because I want that stuff. It's because it's already in order. That's kind of like the order of the things. It's already there. And they're kind of like pretending like, no, this is not happening. And I'm like, how come you're not seeing what is happening? And I have to mention, like, you know, I wanted to have this conversation with somebody who's in another state. I'm living in Florida, and we are, you know, dealing with this situation with the critical race theory. You know, like all these politicians are kind of like arguing that that's reverse racism. And I'm trying to have this conversation with other Latina moms, you know, like how important will be to have this critical thinking in schools, like to address, like how come our children cannot have these conversations? Because sadly, in many homes, because it's a sensitive issue, a lot of things are not talking about it. And instead, they are proving the point, getting defensive, because for me, it's like, you're proving exactly the point. They just went to my school board and they demanded that they have to change the terms, the terminology, because that was offensive towards their children. And I'm like, and guess what? The school board changed the terminology right away. And me being a parent advocate for, I don't even remember now how many years in this county, in the county of Palm Beach, I was flabbergasted. I almost throw up. I was like, you know how many times we have been trying to kind of, you know, incorporate these type of terminologies in our schools, and also, you know, training for the administrators and teachers, because clearly there are many administrators and teachers who are racist, period, including a lot of Latinas. okay? Including a lot of Latinas. I'm telling you, I have to tell it because, that is an issue for me. A lot of the people that I encountered who are the most racist here in South Florida are Latinas. And suddenly, they don't want to talk about it. Suddenly they believe like that's not a huge issue. And now they're arguing that that's reverse racism. So I wanted to have this conversation with you because I've been feeling like at many levels frustrated, but also hopeful in the sense of, what we are trying to do being advocates and mother advocates. And I'm very thankful for the work you're doing. I'm getting emotional because we do need those creative writings at this moment. Octavia Butler's writings. We need those writings now. We need those narratives because all I can see is that instead of addressing the issues, instead of like really going to the root of the matter, which is, like the erasure, the whitewashing of the history of this nation, they are now arguing that they're the victims.
Yeah. That's
wow. I mean, and of course, the school board listens to them. Just one time, and the school board listens to them. And you're telling me like they don't have any privileges? I've been a parent advocate in this county for many years. I've seen how they treat children of color and their parents, especially parents who do not speak English, in very racist ways. And now it's like it's a loaded word. We cannot even talk about it. And we are supposed to just stay quiet. This doesn't exist. And this is affecting a lot of children. Because I am homeschooling and unschooling my children this year for many reasons, but including one of those reasons, the struggles that I have had in the public education system. But also because I believe with all my heart that there are many parents out there that wish they can teach their own, but they can't. Okay? They can't. Either because they think they cannot do it because they're not educated, or either because they have to work because the cost of living is getting higher and higher. So I would like to think that the solution will be, like let's start our own schools. Like that would be very thrilling. But for now, I think we need to keep advocating very strongly for the children that are in public education and their parents, and really, analyze why is these people getting so defensive? Why are they arguing these things?
Right. Yeah, because then the changes are not going to happen if it's getting blocked, right? If it's not, the structural changes aren't happening because of these actions, right? So how can we get beyond that? And I think that's the part for me where I struggle with that because I agree with everything that you said, and then in terms of, okay, well, what do we do? So how can we continue advocating? And I think for me it's just it just feels so exhausting because it is the same conversation over and over again.
Yes, and that's why we want to move on to the creative processes, Cecilia, because at this moment those are the only spaces where I'm feeling safe. My children are feeling safe. And I don't believe in any politician at this moment.
Right.
I saw so many immigrant organizations supporting and backing up this actual administration, and
Mm-hmm.
we wanted to believe again,
Right. Right.
and look what they have
Mm-hmm.
done. Look what they have
Yeah.
just done. Like they went to Guatemala, and that was another blow for me. Like these last few weeks, I was grieving that because I was thinking like, oh, how come a daughter of immigrants, half black, half Asian, black, South Asian, can make those statements? Like, like what are
Mm-hmm.
we doing, parents, as parents? And I'm asking everybody in my audience, what are we doing? What are we teaching our children?
Right.
What about the
Right.
roots? What about, really
Mm-hmm.
the struggles? Because I'm pretty sure the parents of Kamala had a lot of struggle. But it seems like it's, now it's erased because she's the vice.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think when I heard Kamala, I saw the news clip of where she was making that statement of, don't come here. And it just felt just so I can't describe it. It felt so deep. Like I just really felt it kind of I want to spiritually or even genetically. I'm just like this is some bullshit. And I think yeah, because knowing she is the child of two immigrants, a South Asian immigrant and a Jamaican immigrant, and her parents were Berkeley radicals um, in the 60s, part of the movement. And I have a friend who has a saying where she just kind of she jokes and she says, "Oh, when ethnic studies goes wrong, because that's not the purpose of ethnic studies or critical race theory, um, or social justice. That's the opposite of that statement where she said, "Don't come here."
And
And
not
I
even
think,
acknowledging the huge, deep issues of why people have to migrate. Like why
right,
people like
right,
me and my mom, had to migrate. She had to bring me here. Why, like there's so many issues of why people have to move. And
right,
it's not only because I'm a migrant. And I always acknowledge as well, like this is indigenous lands. I'm just a guest in their lands, and I try to instill that in my children, because that's the love we should have for the land. The
right.
land, like listening to what they want to instigate at this moment, like instead of like critical race theory or talking about racism and how we can, start healing that wound as a community. What their solution is like, why don't we teach more patriotism?
Yeah. And that's that. And how do we get beyond this kind of liberal assimilationist kind of thinking to, abolishing, right? So what would it look like to, abolish this government? What would it look like to abolish this school system? And what would it look like to abolish anti-Blackness? And I think, that's all of those are also such big aspects of my parenting. So even with my work that I've done in academia, at the end of the day, I still don't believe in that system. I don't think higher education, or at least the way that it's constructed now, I don't even think it's necessary. There are so many other ways to learn, so many other ways to achieve our goals, so many other ways to achieve community empowerment and building relationships.
So
So when I
yeah,
agree with,
it's true. There's so many other ways, but in my mind, it's like I always try to kind of like comprehend, where are they coming from? Like, where is this mentality coming from? And the only thing that I see is colonizing mentality, like, thinking that we have to shape people's minds in this way. And that's something that, like, I really, like, it's not about being anti-patriotic. I've been accused of that, in the past. It's just, my allegiance is with the earth. My allegiance is with the people, period. um why? Because I seen the inhumanity coming up when flags are raised, and in history. And I always, claim, please, please, please go and look in the books, even that history that is so incomplete because it's only from one perspective. But even in that history, we can see that that type of education, what breeds is more hate. What breeds is destruction. Because instead of, like, really harboring uh, community and respect, what harbors is supremacism and misunderstanding and resentment. So I mean, I wanted to have this conversation today between mothers because, bottom line, I've been accused of many things in my lifetime, liberal and communist and socialist. I'm not in any, I don't put me in any categories because I'm not, okay? I'm just a mother, and I've been trying to do my best, as I think all of us have been trying the last years. um, but we are all raising children who will have to live with each other somehow, because believe it or not, yes, the world is changing, so it's not going to be homogeneous unless we do allow dictatorships and fascist regimens, and those are growing around the world for sure. So that's why I'm very interested in the creative world, in the imagination, in the collective imaginative activities that we are doing, that we are providing to children at this moment, because it seems like there is a huge push at this moment to like, either believe is black or white. And Octavia Butler was really amazing in, creating these perspectives of, like, no, there's so many other options. It's not either or. And we have the possibility in our hands to have families where we can harbor these, where we can allow different worlds to coexist.
Right.
And that's what I love about writers and artists and people who believe we envision different things. That's actually one of the things that I love about Trina Brown, where she's taking it to the next step, next level.
Right.
And I agree. It's our only hope. It's our only joy, like, at this moment, to see those perspectives, and hopefully our children can get into those perspectives as well. Because if we're gonna try to keep following or blocking, all whatever is happening, because it's constant. It seems like, like they wake up in the morning and they really want to do that. It's a waste of energy from our part as well.
Mm-hmm.
So our resistance has to come from a different place for sure.
Yeah, and I think what you're saying about creativity as a site of resistance, so I do writing workshops, creative writing workshops for BIPOC people, and I do see those as healing spaces, and I've done them for the public, and but I also do them for institutions, for their faculty, staff, and students. And I think because I always censure the themes of healing and social justice in some way, and I'm going back and I'm drawing from BIPOC poets and writers, Octavia Butler, Audre Lorde, Toni Morrison, Gloria Anzaldúa, and so many more. And so what I do in the workshops is I kind of take a different approach to it, where I'm interested in their emotional responses, or it's not the rational part of the brain. So I think part of social justice movement work is also healing the mind, body, and spirit. And so yes, we need the theory and the frames and the analysis, and we can teach this to our children. But on the other hand, we also need that other part, the creative part, the spiritual part, the healing part, the healing of the mind, body, and spirit. And I think one way that can happen is through creativity. I mean, there's so many ways, music or dance or
nature. I always call nature
yeah.
some, some of the most amazing healing aspects for our families. And also, being a very strong advocate of teaching children to own spaces, to have their plants, to have relationships with animals, to have relationships with land. Because these are ancestral knowledge as well. Nobody has to teach us these things. It's like it's instinctual. It's coming here for us to kind of like, and for children, it's like you see it. They connect right away to these things. So and we need to keep trying to foster these things, but for sure, I'm so glad that we're trying to make this connection. It's very important that at this moment we also unite as a front, as a madres together. And the fact is there are a lot of mothers and parents parenting solo as you. And that is not an easy label. Like parenting is really, it can be really rough. In the society we are living at, it doesn't really help, like with this. So I was wondering if you happen to have any advice for those that are, doing it by themselves.
Yeah, I think I think it can be so hard because there's things like doing self-care or other things like that, but at the same time what single parents or caregivers really need is structural help, the structural support, or even think different ways to think about family and kinship. So one thing that I'm writing about, one of my essays right now, is when the pandemic happened, right at the beginning, where it's just like, oh, we have to put Lysol on our groceries, whatever it was, everyone was so scared, right?
Yeah, and I was toilet paper, which till this day I don't understand.
Yeah, so it was that time where we just didn't know what was really happening yet, and I remember that I kind of wanted to see friends or other people, and kind of what I noticed with friends or just people in the community is that people just made their pods, and it was usually their partner, their kids or the grandparents, or another family member. And my pod, it was just me and my son, and it felt very isolating because with the pandemic, I actually saw the nuclear family is just kind of even become stronger. Where I think we should abolish the nuclear family if we're thinking about decolonizing the family, or when we think about kinship in expansive ways, not just biological not just relationships based on biological blood.
Yes.
So when I saw everyone kind of, oh no, just my partner, only my in-laws, or only my parents, only my kids, and then it was me and my son, it was so very isolating. So I wish I had better advice for the solo parents, but it's just something that I'm writing about now because that was my experience where it felt like for the pandemic that there wasn't room for the where it was just me and my son for months,
Wow.
and
Wow. I
and
cannot even
yeah,
imagine it. Because
yeah,
that was hard. Like I'm a social extrovert, and I think after the pandemic I had become more like an introvert. Like but still I cannot imagine, like having that feeling of isolation. Because that was kind of hard. Um, One of the things that I like to mention is that my family ended up getting COVID in December, and
mm,
I had a very very strong experience. I was really really sick, and I was gasping for air. But I didn't. I was very afraid, very very afraid. It was like a shade, came on top of me. And I mean, I don't know how many people may believe in that, but I'm a spiritual person and I believe on that. So I received the visit of three persons, and these persons told me that they had to die alone in a hospital. And
mm,
I remember feeling, like the whole energy, like it was like an intense sadness, like intense, intense. Um, and I had a panic attack. And my partner, somehow, we were kind of like trying to isolate each other from each other. We didn't want it to get worse, or the children. And he intervened at that moment. Like he was like, "Oh my gosh, you have to do something because you're gonna die." And I was
mm,
trying to explain to him like the deep grievance that I felt from these persons. Like people
mm,
don't understand. We are living in these times, day and age, where we have technology and we assume like that is companionship, when in reality we need to decolonize our minds and really believe that we need to go back to community and extended families and kinship um and those are things that I think we see the most in societies where they don't value as much their material things. Because I have this encounter with this person who was telling me like, oh, so you will allow people to come into your house and take your stuff. And in my mind is like, well, I do like the things that I have in my house, but is that the most precious things we have? Is that something that I will be teaching my children? Is that something
mm,
that, I'm teaching my children? Is that something that this society is teaching my children? That, like my house has to be surrounded by walls because, they're gonna come and take your stuff from me, like that is not. And I told this lady, no, I don't mind if they don't have anything and they need it, you know, we should live in spaces where we are allowed to ask for help and receive it, and not being punished, and not being thrown in jail, and not being, like, oh my gosh, it's because you're doing this, it's because you did it wrong, it's because, and they put that a lot uh on a lot of us, uh
mhm.
instead of, like supporting the needs of people.
Right.
So those are amazing questions and very very valid questions. And all I can say for parents that are raising their children by themselves is like, I admire you so much, because I know like many times you don't have a break, and you don't have anybody else to tag. And I know this pandemic was very ruthless on a lot of you, especially mentally, because as parents, we want to be in a good shape, in a good mental shape, for our children. But that
Mhm.
doesn't mean that we have to pretend, because that will be even worse. So I hope we were living in systems where we had more help and we can ask for help and we can receive it. So I hope I can improve as well in in my household. I can improve in supporting more of those relationships, uh, and they can be reciprocal as well. Uh,
Right. Yeah.
yeah,
Reciprocal.
yeah,
Hmm.
because a lot of times people just assume like, oh, but they're just gonna come and take. I'm like, who's saying that? Like we will always receive something. We will
Right.
receive. And if we're
Hmm.
gonna keep continuing with this mindset of, scarcity and, hate, I don't know. I don't know. Like I guess everybody will have their own hole in the ground and and like surrounded by wires and electric fences. I don't know. I mean, I just question all the urgency from people who is arguing that certain humanity is becoming socialist or communist. Because around here there's a lot of fear that that's gonna happen. So I wonder if in California it's kind of like the same, or people have other uh, mentality about the situation.
Yeah, I think it probably depends the location. So California, I was born and raised in California, and my parents are from immigrants from Michoacan, Mexico. But I've been in California my whole life. And my son is also was born here and he's lived his whole life here. But I think it depends. So I was raised in Northern California, and from a very young age, I was aware of white supremacist groups. Um, and yeah, I guess it's yeah, I'm trying to think of how to say this kind of in the short way. Yeah, kind of what I learned from my family. There was a lot of dysfunction in my family, so I had a sense of isolation as a child. And then I moved to LA for my PhD program, and I lived in South LA, and now I'm in Boyle Heights, which is almost, um, I think it's like 98% Latina people, working class. People, a lot of immigrant people. So I think it depends, because there are different circles and spaces where there is that more of that sense of community, but at the same time there is other factors, political differences or also racism. So California. Uh, Historically, just one thing about California is that California had the most Jim Crow laws, even more than any of the southern states. And even today, California has the most number of hate groups, active hate groups. So on the one hand, yes, we're seen as very liberal, but on the other hand, there's these other more deeply kind of entrenched racism and then frameworks. So I think a lot of it can depend on someone's location. So where I am, there is more of that sense of community. But then, what I'm writing about in my personal essays is that, just when the pandemic hit, it's just kind of everyone kind of retreated, or at least it felt that way. But there was, I mean, I did have support in other ways, but it's very complicated. So it's just something that I'm exploring a little bit in my writing.
Hmm. Hmm. So I just want, before we have to finish, I just want to invite everybody to check both of the books that Cecilia Caballero has collaborated. I think both of them are amazing pieces of work. I'm very in love with Parenting for Liberation, Trina Brown mission. I love what she's achieving, especially in the Black community. She's pro-Black. children, and she's relentless about it. And I think, like that is kind of like my invitation to a lot of parents, especially Latine, in our mess. We have so many ranges, as you can see in this conversation. There's so many tonalities to what Latines, or whatever you want to call it, in this country. But my call today will be to really start evaluating the measurement, and the need for our solidarity and unity at this moment. Not for ourselves necessarily, but for our children. Because if this is going to continue, we will be really painted in the next generations. And I think, please, if you have a voice and you want to know more, perhaps you say, well, I don't know enough about this, it's so complicated. And all I can say is, yes, it could be complicated, and all of us are kind of like a little bit, like getting out of the funk of the COVID situation, which, it was tough. It was tough for a lot of us, especially for families that lost loved ones. And that happened a lot in our community. So even if that is, the case, don't think that we don't have a role to play. And if we stay quiet when, we are seeing this type of behaviors, there are many things that we won't be able to control. But if you want to teach your children, and if you want to have these conversations at home at least, these will be two amazing books that you can read. Like, I think, those two books are amazing. There's so many other books, like, I have the one that I also collaborated, which is Raising the Global Mindset. We wrote those with 22 women from around the globe. All of us have different perspectives, but all we have in common is that we want humanity back for next generations to move forward. Because bottom line, we are already here, and our children too. We all deserve respect. We all deserve a different perspective of world. And what is happening right now is pretty much another type of bullying and gaslighting and attack. And so, if you can take part of any of the creative processes that are being offered, catch up with Cecilia. I think, are you offering these creative writing classes online?
Yeah, so I will have some for the summer, later this summer, but I'm looking forward to it, and yeah, I'll share that with you if anyone's interested.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Cecilia, for having this conversation. This has been really, I have to say, and this has been really good for me. I don't know if for you, I know you were a little bit nervous about it, because, like, I don't like to script a lot of our conversations. I know people, like, write down questions and answers and stuff like that. I just wanted to, like, have a conversation about, things that are dear to our heart. So I hope it was good for you as well.
It was, yeah. Yeah. Thank you. Muchísimas gracias. It was just, it was so good to finally speak with you, because I've followed your work for a long time. And, hopefully we can keep supporting each other, maybe collaborating again. So I'm really looking forward to it.
Yes, yes. And I hope, like, I'm not a writer, but I have so many stories that hopefully one day I'll get to put on writing. At this moment, I've been feeling a little bit overwhelmed about, all the things that are happening, but I'm honoring those feelings as well. So thank you so much. And feel welcome to come back anytime if you happen to have another book, or you want to keep promoting your classes.
Okay, I guess I will.
Thank you so much for everyone that joined, and I hope this conversation will be recorded in IGTV. Otherwise, I will try to save it and put it in our YouTube channel. Thank
Okay.
you.
All right, gracias. Have a good night.
Bye.
Bye.